In this video, I'm going to show you my thought process for how I approach complex projects by attempting to solve multiple CSS battles entirely live. These are CSS challenges I've never seen before, and I'm going to go through my entire thought process of how I would approach it, start writing some code, debug live any problems that I run into, and this is great for seeing how I actually approach problems, how I overcome bugs I run into, and you can really apply some of these skills to your own coding. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name is Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. I'm gonna get started by tackling this Deadpool CSS battle, which has like Wolverine Deadpool. That's because I recently watched the Deadpool Wolverine movie. Great movie if you haven't seen it, but I think this is gonna be a great starting point because it doesn't look like it's too challenging, but it's challenging enough it'll make me think through certain things. So the very first thing I like to do when I approach a project like this is I like to look at all the different components and think about how they're going to work together. Obviously the background's super simple. I just make a background that has that particular color. Same with this red section, it's just going to be a red circle. But the more complicated sections are going to be these black circles as well as the white eyes. So this black circle, the first thing that pops into my mind is I could create a shape that is essentially a black circle and cut it in half. But the problem with that is you can see that this black circle is actually a full circle with like a middle segment taken out of it. So if I create a normal circle with this height and this width, and I cut it in half, it may not give me the exact rounding that I want. I may play around with both approaches of creating one big circle and putting a red strip down the middle, and creating two separate circles and cutting them in half to see which one actually gives me the approach I want. But those are the two ways I think about that problem. Now the eyes, these look to be perfectly cut in half circles, so I'm just going to create a circle, cut it in half, and that should be all that I need to do. So to get started, we can kind of tackle the easy things, which is the yellow and the red sections. So the very first thing I want to do is I'm going to have this div here, which is going to be my background. And I think actually I can probably just style the body. I haven't done a CSS battle in a while, but I think I can just say body, and I can give it that exact color. Whoops, this should be background color. There we go. Paste that in, and yep, that did work exactly as I want. Now for this div, this I'm just going to have be the head wrapper. There we go. I'm going to give it this red color. So we can say head wrapper. Background color is going to be that. There we go. And let's give it a height here. It looks like maybe, it says right here, this is 400 by 300 pixels. So the head's probably about 200 pixels tall. And if we want to center that, we can do that here. We can just do a display of flex and justify our content in the center and align our items in the center. Now if we give this a width, which is probably also going to be 200 pixels, and we round it with a border radius, we'll just do 100%, you can see we get a perfect circle. And when I do my comparison here, if I just do a little diff, we'll notice that these green sections that appear mean that I am off on the shape. And if I look at the comparison, you can see that my shape is actually a little bit lower than the one above. And it's also not quite big enough on the, or it's a little bit too big on the bottom. So I actually just need to move it up a little bit. So it's actually not perfectly centered, which I find a little bit strange. Yeah, it does appear that it's just not perfectly centered. So instead of doing this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to position this absolutely. Absolute, just like that. We'll say the left is going to be 100 pixels because that did look like it lined up perfectly left and right centered. And the top here, I'm going to do like 90 pixels. That does way too far. So let's do, actually, yeah, 45 pixels. Nope. So it's going to be 50 pixels. Nope. 55 pixels. Still not quite right. 56, 57. Looks like I'm going the wrong way. So 54, 53. 54 looks like it's dead on the money. As you can see, there's pretty much no green coloring at all. There's just a faint outline, which is probably because my browser is slightly zoomed in. If I zoom this out to 100%, it's still there. But either way, it looks pretty good at that particular level. Now we can turn this diff mode off so we can actually see our product that we're working on. And the next thing I want to work on is going to be the black circle. And like I mentioned, there's two different ways that I can approach this with either one circle or multiple circles cut in half. I'm going to get started by approaching it with the multiple circles cut in half, just because I think that's the way that will not work, but I'm interested to see if it actually will work. So we can come in here and we can say that this is going to have a class, which is going to be black circle. There we go. And I'll also give it the class of left. So we know that this is going to be the left-hand side. Close that off. And I'll copy this down because I'm going to have a right-hand side as well. So we'll come in here and call this one right. So now we have our black circle. And for all of this, we're going to put all of our generic classes inside of there. And then we're going to have a black circle dot left, which is specifically for position it to the left. So we'll come in here, close that off, and then we'll do the exact same thing for the right side. just like that. There we go. So let's look on a black circle first. Obviously, we need to give it a width and a height and a background color. So we'll say background color, and it is actually pure black, so that's nice and easy. We'll say the height here is going to be 90 pixels or something like that. And we'll say that the width is going to be, I don't know, let's just say 90 pixels as well. So we get essentially perfect circle. Obviously, this is not showing up as a perfect circle. I'm not really sure why. My height and width are both exactly the same. There may be something going on with the display going on in these. Oh, it's because I have two black circles obviously stacked on top of each other. That makes a lot of sense. For now, I'm going to comment this one out so I can work on just one of the circles at a time. And obviously, this height of 90 is not nearly big enough. Let's try 190. That's going to be too big. We'll just do 150. I know it's probably not correct, but we can kind of get started at that point. And same thing here, I'll make this 150. Now I will make my border radius 100% so we get a perfect circle. And I'm going to try just doing a little bit of work to position this in the correct location. So here I can do a top, and essentially this is just going to be in the dead center. So it should be 50%. So I can say top 50%, and I can also say transform. And I want to translate. Actually, I'll just use the translate property, and I want to translate essentially 0 and negative 50%. Actually, maybe 50%? Negative 50%. Let me see what's going on here. So if I have just a top of 50%, that's not doing anything, it looks like. Oh, duh. I should probably position my element absolutely first. So absolute, just like that. And now if I add in this, you can now see that this is perfectly vertically aligned in the dead center, just like I want it to be. Now I just want to offset it a little bit. We'll say that maybe like the left property here is going to be like 10 pixels. Let's see, we'll put the diff mode on. Not quite right. It's probably going to be 20 pixels. Still actually a little bit off. If I turn it off diff mode, it looks like it's a little bit too big. So we'll maybe say like 25 pixels. That's obviously too far. 22. Still might be too far. So maybe it's going to be like 18 or something. Put that diff mode back on. We'll see. 17. That actually looks really good at 17. Now we just need to make sure the height is correct, because right now it's a little bit too tall at 150. So we will try 140 as our height. That's actually, no, it's too small. Actually, I need to make it a little bigger. So 160, 165, 164. It's going to be somewhere around there. It looks like 164 lines up pretty well with this top section, but you'll notice it's actually too wide. My circle is currently too wide, and that's because if we look at the arch, you can see the arch doesn't quite line up exactly as it does before, and that's because this thing, I think, is technically taller than it is wide, just based on the way that this curve is working. And I could try to fine-tune this by modifying my width. For example, making it 140 doesn't quite work. Making it 160 actually looks like it lines up pretty well. If I try 170, it's going to probably go the other direction, and we can see it does. So 160 actually lines up really well with this. It doesn't quite line up with the right-hand side of my circle shape. I bet if I make it 164, now I have a perfect circle. Still not far enough along in this direction. So let me try making it a little bit wider. We'll say 165, 166. That actually looks really good. We'll make this 166. And you'll notice now that the entire circle shape is essentially what I want it to be around that entire section. But again, you'll notice I now have just one full circle here. Doing a circle that was cut in half, it doesn't really work, because again, to get the curve to be perfectly aligned, as you can see like I have right here, to get that perfectly aligned curve, I essentially need a circle that is this big. So I would need to cut off essentially everything in this middle section to make it work, or I could cut off everything to the right of here and then copy it and cut off everything to the left of this one. In my case, I'm just going to keep this one black circle, get rid of these left and right classes. I actually don't even need them if we go with just this particular approach. And instead, we can close off this. There we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a band that essentially goes just right down the middle. So we'll just call this red band. And I don't have emmet in here, so we'll say div class red band. Close that off. There we go. And we're going to have our red band. And the red band for this one is just essentially going to be the full height of this. So we can say height 100%. Let's do a width of like 20 pixels. It'll probably have to be bigger than that. The background color is just going to exactly match the color of this Deadpool mask. So we'll just copy that over. There we go. You can now see we have a red band. I obviously need to position it in the very dead center. So we'll do position absolute. And we're going to come in here with a left of 50%. Translate of negative 50%. That should put me in the exact dead center. And now I just need to increase the size of this. Looks like it needs to be about doubled to 40 pixels, maybe 45 pixels. Actually, that's too far. We'll try 35 pixels. That actually looks pretty good. Let me try 36 versus 37. I don't know, I would say somewhere around there, 35, 36, somewhere around there looks really good, where you can see if we toggle between these modes, you really can't notice almost any perceivable difference between them. And if there is any difference, it's most likely due to my zoom level. Now I'm going to change this to 165 and 165 to check to see if that actually looks good. It actually looks like it's a little bit off on this diff mode, so we'll go back to 166, 166. It looks a little bit better. Still maybe not perfect, but it looks pretty good at that level. Now the final step is going to be positioning the eyes in the center here for both of these. So I can just put them inside this black circle. So we'll have a div, we'll give it a class of eye, and we'll also say that this one is going to be the left, because for these ones, it really doesn't make sense to have both of these be the exact same div. I mean, that would be kind of crazy to do. So we'll have the right and left eye. And again, we'll do this thing where we have our eye left and our eye right. Now, before we get any further on the eye, I did actually notice one thing just looking over at the side here. There's a little bit of a black bar. You can't really see it very well, especially probably on YouTube, it's almost invisible, but there's a slight black bar at the very bottom and the top of this black circle that we have going on. And that's because our red band is essentially just not quite tall enough. I'm going to make it just a little bit taller than 110%, so, or than 100%, so we'll make it like 110%. And we're also going to set our black circle to have an overflow of hidden, so it doesn't actually escape any of the bounds. That actually still gives us that black bar. If I zoom out, it is still there. That's interesting that that black circle is showing up there. So we'll get rid of the overflow hidden. We'll come in here. We'll put a top of -5 pixels. And this way, we're just essentially getting 5 pixels of overflow on the top and bottom to get rid of that black, halo effect that was showing up there. It may be because of my browser, my zoom level, not 100% sure what's causing it, but this at least will eliminate that particular problem. Now for these eyes, they're going to be pretty similar to what we have here for this black circle. So I'm just going to kind of copy all of this that we have, paste it into here for the eye, but obviously the background color for this one is all white, as we can see over here. The size is going to be significantly smaller, so let's bump this down to like 20 pixels so we have something much more reasonably sized to work with. There we go. It looks like it's going to be a little bit bigger than that, but for now, that at least is working as we expect it to. And I should probably make sure, yeah, both my eye right and my eye left are there. I just need to make sure I position them in the correct location. So they're not 100% in the very center, so this top 50% really doesn't actually work. Instead, I'll probably need to manually position it with some top and left values. So let's go ahead and we'll start with a top value here. Let's just say we want to do 50 pixels, 90 pixels, and I'm going to put this into diff mode. So 90 looks like it's too far, 60 is not far enough, 70, 80. So we'll say it's probably somewhere around like 75 or so. That looks pretty close. And now we'll go with our left values. We'll do like 20, maybe 25. That actually looks pretty good. If I increase the size of this circle a little bit, we'll do like 25 and 25. That looks really good, actually. Maybe just needs to be a little bit bigger, actually. So we'll make the width a little bit more. We'll try 30. And we'll make this 30 as well. And we're just going to move the eyeball back a little bit. So we'll try 70 here, 20 here. Maybe it needs to be moved down a little bit to move this over a little bit. Maybe move it back one. That actually looks really quite good. It looks like it's in the exact right spot. It just needs to be essentially cut in half. If we move this off of div mode, yeah, it looks like it really just needs to be entirely cut in half. Now, probably the easiest way for us to cut this shape in half is actually just to only put a border on one half of the shape and then essentially reduce the height of the shape in half. So to show you what I'm talking about, our border radius here, we're just going to do it on the bottom left, and let's do the bottom right. There we go. So now if we let that save real quick, hopefully it should do something. Let's make it actually like a pixel value. So it's like 20 pixels, for example. Same thing here, 20 pixels. That's actually not quite working. We'll move it back to 100%. And I think that's because I seem to say left bottom here. Let's try that. I never remember the order of all these. So we'll say that doesn't look like it's working. So we'll say border, left, radius. Here we go. We got bottom left and we got bottom top. Border, bottom, right, radius. There we go. And now that has given us a similar or half circle shape, but of course it's too tall. If we cut our height in half, we should hopefully get that shape correct. I just need to make sure that this value right here is essentially a pixel value. So we'll say 30 pixels because it needs to be essentially a value that is the same as our width. So we'll say 30 pixels here. And now you can see I get a perfect semicircle shape. That is exactly what I want. Now I just need to rotate this. So we can come in here with a rotate. We'll try 30 degrees at first. that actually looks like the perfect rotation, so that was a pretty good guess on my part. I just need to move it down a little bit and to the left. So we'll say here that we're going to do left a little bit. We'll say, I don't know, let's do it back a couple pixels. We'll do like 15, 16, 17, 18. Now let's try moving it down. So we'll do like 67. Oops, that's not right direction. We need to do like 75, 6, 7, 8. And I need to maybe move it left just a little bit more. 18. And actually maybe need to rotate it like 29 degrees, 28, 27. Looks like 28 is about correct. And maybe move it down just a little bit more. Whoops, that's the wrong direction. Still the wrong direction. That actually is probably about correct. Let's do this in normal mode. Looks like I maybe have it slightly too big on the eye size. So we'll say like 29 here. And I'll just copy that down to these values here. Let's actually do 28 so we can get exactly in half for a height. 28, and this would be 14. Let's see if that shrunk it down enough. It looks pretty close. We'll try moving it up a little bit. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect. Looks like it's a little bit small now, which is kind of an interesting take. So maybe the 29 was the correct value. There we go. And we'd probably just need to move it back down just a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit tall. I don't know. I think it's close enough though. It only moves a very, very slight amount. When I look at it in diff mode, it's almost exactly perfect. So I'd say that that's probably good enough. Now all I need to do here is change what I've essentially done for my left. So this will be down here. So I can get rid of this left value on this section. And the eye right should just have a right of 18 pixels. And I just need to rotate the eye the other direction. So we'll smooth the rotate down into here to be negative 28. And it looks like that is exactly what we want, but it's positioned possibly in the wrong location. So I think maybe it's because I need to change something about my rotation. Let's see exactly why that is. Or maybe my right value needs to be modified a little bit. There you go. Actually just adding 1 to that. Looks like that was exactly what I needed to make this work. And the way that we can test to see if this actually works is just by clicking submit, and it'll give us a ranking essentially between 0 and 100% for how close we are to what the actual thing looks like. And I got a score of 601. That essentially means I have 100% accuracy on this. You can see 100% accuracy. Now the scoring, the way that CSS Battle works is based on the least amount of code that you write, but I generally don't actually follow that. I just like to write the code in the way that makes the most sense, because generally writing the smallest amount of code makes you do a lot of really hacky, weird things that you would never do in a real world application. And I try to make this about as close as possible to a real world application. Now let's go back and see if we can tackle something else on the CSS battles. So we'll just go to the overall, all the different battles, and just kind of see what there is that piques our interest. Actually, I kind of like this one right here, which kind of works with some weird shapes going on. So we're going to do this one right here. So the very first thing I like to do is just get rid of all this extra code. We really don't need it. And I actually like to put my CSS styles at the top. It's just more like how I actually write CSS. So here we go. This is what we're going to work on. First of all, we're going to get our body color. The most straightforward thing we can do. Background color is going to be just like that. There we go. And then we essentially just have 2 different types of shapes that we're going to be giving these 2 different colors. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different segments that I want to do. And the interesting thing to note is that segment 1 and 5 and segment 2 and 4 are essentially the exact same thing. They're just positioned in slightly different locations. So that shouldn't actually be that hard for me to do. So we can come into here and we can specify different segments that we have. So we can say segment 1, which should be essentially the same as segment 5. There we go. I'm going to put them both in the same selector. And then we're going to have segment 2 and also segment 4. And those are going to be in the exact same selection. And then finally, segment 3. Now, to actually style these segments is essentially just going to be creating a rectangle. And I think what we're going to want to do is use the skew property to give us this angled shape on it, but I'm not 100% sure. It's not a property I use almost at all in my day-to-day CSS work. So let's just go ahead and we're just going to get started with something really simple. I'll create a single div and we're just going to give it a class of segment 1 just to get us something to get started with. Background color is going to be this color right here. There we go. Width, let's just say it's going to be 50 pixels. And we'll do a height of 100 pixels, just so we can see it on the screen. There we go, we have it right there. I should probably get rid of any padding that I have on here as well, or a margin. There we go, that way we have nothing extra showing up on our screen. And now I'm going to just move this down. I think it's just, it's actually not quite centered, I don't think, but we can try centering it. We can say top 50%. Position absolute, And we can say translate 0 and -50%. There we go. That should translate us to the correct location. Doesn't look like it's moving though, and I think that's because there should be no comma here. There we go. So it actually looks like it may actually be centered. It looks like it is actually lining up perfectly. And I think I actually have the height of this element right. The width is also correct. Actually, that's kind of surprising. All I need to do is try to skew it into the correct location. So I think the skew property is what I need. But like I said, I almost never use this. So we'll say transform skew, and we'll see exactly what we need to do here. So let's try skew x, and we'll just put in a value. I think it's based on degrees, so we'll say 20 degrees. Obviously, that looks to be the wrong direction for the skew, so we'll say -20 degrees. And this actually doesn't quite look like what I want, because I only want the tops and the bottoms to be moving. I don't actually want the sides of it. So let's try skewing in the y direction. There we go. That is actually what we want. We'll do 20 degrees. We'll do a little diff on this. And now let's try skewing it a little bit further. Maybe it's 25 degrees. Nope. 25. There we go. That actually looks like it lines up perfectly for the angle of the thing. Now I just need to make sure the position is correct. It looks like I need to move it down a little bit further. And that's because the skew essentially just moved the position of this. So I'm going to put this top value in pixels. We'll get rid of this translate because we don't actually need it. So we'll say 100 pixels. See if that lines up. We'll use the diff tool for this. 120, 110, 105. Looks like 110 was pretty close. Let's come in here and look at this. Maybe I need to skew it slightly more in one direction or the other. So we'll do like 26 degrees. That actually might be more correct. And we'll try moving this down just a little bit. That actually looks perfect. So if we look at the actual view here and analyze, yeah, I can't really notice any difference between these. So this is a good example of me kind of knowing about this skew property. I should probably capitalize the Y here just so it looks a little better, so it doesn't say skewy. So it's just a thing that I was familiar with this skew property. I've never really used it. All I knew is that it was a way to make shapes kind of bend a little bit and have this little angle to them. And just by tinkering around, I was able to stumble upon the correct answer. But a lot of times just stumbling upon the correct answer doesn't happen. Like I noticed skew X doesn't work and skew doesn't work, and skew Y I happened to find out is the one that worked. But if I didn't ever find out what was working and I knew that skew was probably what I wanted, I could just easily go to NDN, look up the documentation for skew. They have tons of examples, and I would find an example that essentially looked like this, and I'd be like, oh, that's probably what I need. So now that we have segments done, I want to come in here with a second or a separate selector for segment 1. And that's going to be specifically just for positioning the left property. So where do I have the left property? Obviously, I don't have a left property, so we'll do segment 5 here because obviously this is as far left as it goes. So I'm going to copy this, do segment 5, and all I want to do is say right of 0. And there we go. That should put it in the correct location, but it looks like it doesn't. It is way off. It needs to be either lower or higher. So I'm going to move my top value up into segment 1. There we go, segment 1, put a top value in here, and this one I'm going to have a separate top value, which is going to be pretty similar. So we'll start with 100 pixels, and I'll move the top value out of here. There we go. Let's do 90, 80, there we go, and I think I need to go a little lower, so 85, 86, whoops, pixels, there we go, 87, there we go, 87 looks perfect. So we'll keep it just like that. So now I have everything for segment 1 and 5 entirely done. Now we can move on to segment 2, which is going to be pretty similar. So I'll just take the code in here, directly copy this. I'll make sure I add a semicolon to the end of here, just because that's good practice for when you're writing actual CSS code. Background color for this one is going to be this darker color, so we'll paste that in. And the width for these is going to be quite a bit wider. So I'll come in here, we'll get segment 2 and 4, and I might as well, while I'm at it, add in segment 3. So segment 2 is going to have the exact same height, but I believe the width is probably about double. So we'll say it's going to be 200 pixels. Sorry, 100 pixels for the width. There we go. And now all I need to do is just move it down to the position that I want it to be. So we can come into here and select just segment 2. There we go. And I'm actually going to move this code up a little bit into hereabouts. There we go. Just so I can get it in between segment 1 and segment 5 to kind of keep it aligned a little bit better. We'll minimize these back down. And this one is just going to have a top value. There we go. And for now, I think I'm actually going to comment out segment 4 so it doesn't get in the way of what I'm working on. Also, my skew direction is probably going to be the exact same, but with a negative value. So let me come into here, change this to a negative value, and skew me upwards instead of to the downward direction. So my left property, let's see if just putting in 50 pixels lines me up. And of course it does. That is great. Now all we need to do is move this down a little bit more. So we'll do 90, 95, maybe even 100. Actually, 100 is looking very close. Let's try 101, 102. It's going the wrong way. Try 99, 98, 99. That looks really quite good. Let's see. Yeah, I really don't notice almost any difference other than it needs to be actually moved down a little bit. So let's try 100. Yeah, 100 looks really good. I like that. It looks like the skew is maybe a little off though, because if I look at the far right side, it should be bent down a little bit more. So I might actually have to skew this slightly more. For example, we'll just come into the diff mode here. We'll see how this looks with 27 versus 25, 26, 27. 27 looks decent. Let me just try moving this up a little bit. 99 pixels, 98, 99, 100. Whoops, 99. It looks pretty good. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to when I had 26, move this to 100, and I think that's probably good enough. Again, it's probably just a little bit of zooming of my browser. If I zoom it out a little bit, still off by a little bit, but honestly, you get the gist. It's pretty much the exact same thing. So now we can mess with segment number 4. So we can come in here. Segment 4 is essentially the exact same thing, but I need to change this to be the right property, just like that. I want to comment segment 4 back in. And if we look at the diff mode, it actually lines up perfectly, so we don't really need to change anything at all, which is great because the top value for segment 4 and 2 is the same, so we can just leave it directly into there and take it out of here. I'm a little bit curious why the top segment or the top value was different for segment 1 versus segment 5. A little bit strange, but overall, nothing really to worry about. Now, the final segment is going to be segment number 3, which actually looks to have the same skew as the other ones. So we'll come into here with segment 3. I'm going to copy essentially everything I have in here. This one is going to be a positive 26 degrees. The color is going to be slightly different for this one. And we need to specify our left property, which I believe is just going to be 150 pixels. There we go, and that actually does line up properly. Now we just need to make the height of this a little bit bigger. So I think it's going to be 200, which will drop our top value by 50. And it looks like that actually just lines up perfectly. We don't even need to make any other changes. So the nice thing about this shape, the way that I kind of analyzed it, this whole entire CSS design, is I was able to break it down into distinct sections. I noticed section 1 and section 5 are identical, just placed in slightly different locations. Same things with section 2 and section 4. They are identical, just again, placed in slightly different locations. And section 3 is really just like a really big version of section 1 and section 5. If we actually look at the code for segment 3 here, you can see this one has a width of 50 and a height of 100 for segment 1 and 5. And this is just a width of 100, height of 200. So it's literally just doubled the values of the previous one, relatively straightforward. And now if I do a quick submission, I should hopefully see that I have 100% accuracy on this. I'd be pretty surprised if I didn't because it's really pretty much exactly there. And if I close out of this, you'll notice we get a 100% match. Now, if you want to be able to tackle CSS problems like this with relative ease, I highly recommend checking out my CSS Simplified course. It's linked down in the description below. This course covers everything you need to know about CSS from the absolute basics all the way up to complex things like animations and responsive designs. And the best part is it really builds on the core fundamental knowledge of understanding how CSS works, which makes it really easy to write more complex CSS code since you know exactly what each line of CSS is doing. That's why I created this course to really help me and other people understand CSS at a fundamental level. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend you check it out in the description down below. With that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.